Today, we will have a lesson that is a little different. We will do a review of what we've studied and answer questions. But just a short quote from what we learned. We need the intellect in order to exalt the goal to the extent that it is felt in me, in my feeling. We need the intellect in order to exalt the goal, glorify the goal to the extent that it is felt in my feeling.
Yes, after we learned the preface to the wisdom of Kabbalah many times, the lessons that we're now watching from 2001, 2002, there were many years still when we were in Linus, the veteran people remember. So we would come and study 5 hours of Pticha in the morning or Tes, and also in Shabbat afternoon, 3 more hours. And so we would study more and more from the Pticha, the preface, but Rav would always emphasize the main thing is the intention, reaching the right intention. And with it, we also need to know the terms, the order of the process of unfolding from above downwards. It's not that we're studying intellectually to pass an exam and do we remember it or not. That's not the main thing. We should mention the names of the terms and get to know them, but from that, we want to yearn to attain them and understand them. And from that yearning, the light shines on our soul and brings us close to our goal. To the point that in Baal HaSulam's instructions to study the tests, he says, repeat the terms again and again. And there's also the table of questions and answers there. He says, until it sits in your mind like in a box. And yet, with that, he says the main thing is the light. So now we will do a review of what we studied in the last few lessons. We'll give more time for questions. We saw that in the last few lessons there were many questions, not all were answered. So we'd like to summarize the last few lessons we saw, and then we'll continue, of course. Most important is to listen to our Rav and his explanations. So where were we? Maybe let's do a quick drawing of what we studied so far. So we've discussed the 4 phases of direct light. There is the root phase, then phase 1, phase 2. I'm adding the arrows here. Phase 1 is a will to receive, but it's still not active as a will to receive, it's just completely filled with light of Chokhmah. Then light of at the end of the phase 1, she wants to be like the giver because she receives this push from the light, this desire to be similar to him. When she tries to be similar to him, that's already called phase 3. And she wants to bestow, and in order to bestow, she receives. That's the form of reception that she knows the root phase wants it to do. That's our goal. And then in phase 4, she's completely a will to receive, because that's how she bestows to the Creator. So phase 4, we can say that, and that is root 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the 4 phases of direct light, phases of the light. And then phase 4 is called Malchut. Malchut reveals in herself all of the phases before her. She finds them in herself. So we have the root, then phase 1, and phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. And we can also draw it to the other way around, that Bchina Dalet is the middle point, the central point, in which case 4 will be here, and she tries to recognize and understand how she was created and why, And then she identifies 3, 2, 1, and root. And when she recognizes the gap, the distance between her and the root, she performs a restriction, tzimtzum. What's a restriction? It means that she basically says, I am not receiving. I'm not receiving the pleasure directly. I set a condition. I'm willing to receive only if it's in order to bestow. And here, the partzufim begin to emerge. Partzuf is a masach that reflects the light back. If direct light comes to it, it rejects it. And with the masach, it rejects that light and brings out reflected light. Reflected light is considered by the created being. The direct light comes from the creator. And when there is a level of a measure of equivalence between them, that creates inner light, which is a clothing of the measure that can be received from the direct light, clothed by the reflected light. That clothing has a certain measure, and that measure is called inner light. And there's also a measure that cannot be received. So the place of the coupling, the zivug, is called peh. The place until we can receive is called tabur. The place where we cannot receive is called sof. And the end of that is in siyum raglin. What is that in relation to the world of restriction? So we said that in the restriction, the phase 4 is what was restricted. This point was restricted. Where is it here? It is here under the siyum raglin, which means that the whole spiritual partzuf, rosh, toch, and sof, are above the true phase 4. When we say that there was a coupling by striking in the rosh of the partzuf, it is made over those first 9 sfirot, the phases that are before phase 4. And the whole expansion of the screen is called within and without. It's in the qualities of the masach. It's with the condition of masach and reflected light, not phase 4 itself. Phase 4 itself still remains empty. When does it become filled? When does it enter the process? Rob will explain that later on. That only happens in the soul of Adam HaRishon. That's where the true phase 4 begins to be involved. But this whole expansion of screen and reflected light happens above phase 4. Then we say that this phase 4 that emerged, let's make a new drawing here. So the first coupling of striking, then there was an expansion until the tabu, and we have the siyum raglin. And after she expanded for the first time, which is called galgalta, she was purified or refined. The masach rose again to the peh of galgalta, and then another coupling was made on a lower level of coarseness. This is called ab. And then again, the masach was refined, and another coupling happened called sag. And again, it refined, and a new coupling, zivug, was made called ma. Once again, it refined, and another zivug called Bon. All of those are names that have meaning in terms of gematria, in terms of the numerical value of the letters, whether there is light of Chokhmah or not, whether there's Aleph in the calculation or not. These things are more complex. But the principle is that each such Parzuf is an addition of transition of light into the Malchut. And if once again we draw the Malchut, the phase 4 that exists here, with all of the prior 3 phases, so this whole expansion of Galgalta is only an expansion of a thin line that comes from Ein Sof. If all of this is phase 4, then there is a thin line that comes from Ein Sof and barely touches the middle line. But you can't draw it here, but it doesn't touch the middle line, the middle point. It's above it. And all of those 5 Parzufim, which of course correspond to the 4 phases of direct light, correspond to the coarseness. Galgalta comes over coarseness level 4, then Ab level 3, then Sag 2, Ma merges on coarseness level 1, and Bon on level root. All of those together are called a world. They contain all the discernments, all of the actions of the screen and reflected light over that general coarseness, and therefore it is called the world of Adam Kadmon. That's a name of a world. Adam Kadmon is just a name here. We shouldn't interpret it as some sort of a man, or because of the word Adam, just a name. We typically call it Ak. Thus far, we've learned with Rav in the 4 or 3.5 lessons that we've learned so far from the series. And now we'll be very, very happy to hear questions, scrutinies, what's clear, what's not clear, how does it come together with the whole picture of the unfolding so far. Because next, Rav will explain more and more, and based on this, he'll go into further and further depths. So we'll be happy to hear questions. Yes, Jonathan, please.
What does it mean, everything that happens there with the coarseness that begins with coarseness of 4 and then 3, 2, 1? What does it mean with respect to the work with the light and the vessel? Misha, we said yesterday that when there is expansion, now we're talking about the expansion of the worlds, right? The first world that was created is Adam Kadmon. That's the first world. And then Parzuf Galgalta is the first Parzuf. It came out on the records of 4 and 4. It's the first Parzuf, so we still don't have clothing. So it has 4 courses of 4. Every spiritual object receives as much as it can. It cannot receive less than the maximum it can. Its coarseness is 4, right? Now, there's a phenomenon called clash of surrounding light. As we say, it received 20%, 80% remained outside. It couldn't receive. But the pleasure it sees, that pleasure presses to be received, but the Parzuf cannot receive anymore because it received as much as it could already. Then there's another phenomenon, a whole mechanism. In Teres Baal HaSulam explains it, but we haven't talked about it, that the last record is always lost. He can receive less now. He cannot receive on phase 4 now. He no longer. Now he does a coupling on 3, and the coupling on 3, on the records of 3, is already Parzuf that is called Ab. And this is how it continues until it loses all the records. But in every such coupling, when the next Parzuf is created, the previous Parzuf receives a greater light. The previous Parzuf receives a greater light. In this way, the whole world of Adam Kadmon is filled with all the light. But we haven't talked about that yet.
French. Thank you. In the Rosh, every time we see the direct light, which is all the pleasure the Creator gives to the created being, and then we see the reflected light, which the created being rejects all of the pleasure. But then there is some calculation we don't see in the Rosh, and that brings the inner light. How does that calculation work? How does it happen in the Rosh if we don't see it?
אולי אחת המפורסמות והידועות ביותר בתלמוד 10 הספירות, בפתיחה ובכלל, בעל הסולם לא מרבה...
So Baal HaSulam gives us the example that is very known. In general, Baal HaSulam doesn't use that many examples, but when he uses one, it has everything in it, and that's the example of the host and the guest. So, until the first restriction, the pleasure and the vessel that receives the pleasure, they descended together. This is why it's called for phases of direct light. Why was the first restriction made? The first restriction was made because Malchut decided to adorn herself. What does that mean? The Ari writes, it arose in his simple will, meaning Malchut wants to fulfill the will of the Creator to benefit the created beings. And she understands that just like she's a will to receive that faces the pleasure directly, she doesn't fulfill the Creator's will to bestow to her, because to do good to her, because his will is that she will resemble him, that she will have equivalence with him. And therefore, after the restriction, there's already a condition. The tzimtzum, the restriction, becomes a law, that receiving the pleasure directly is not possible. The condition is the equivalence with the host. And this is the screen and reflected light, the ability to overcome the desire. Why overcome it? Because she has something new, and that's the desire to equalize with the host and be like the host. So the screen is the expression of that. It's not, don't think about it like a drawing of an arrow that goes up or down. What is that arrow that goes up and down? What is the direct light? The direct light is that Malchut reveals, again, that in the Creator there is a will to give to her directly, and she has a will to receive it, but because of the force of the restriction and the masach, she overcomes the will to receive, because the status of the host and the connection with the host is more important to her than her will to receive the pleasure directly. So when we see this arrow, it's not something technical. What is a restriction? It is said, one who conquers his desire, even though he yearns to receive very much. The yearning to receive doesn't disappear. It exists in Malchut, but there is a force to overcome it called a masach. What's this overcoming? The desire to equalize with the host and do good to him as he wants to do good to her. And therefore we say that this reflected light, this arrow that goes back, is 100%. As much as he wants to bestow to her, she wants to bestow to him in return. She can't receive a little bit and say, the rest I'll reflect, I'll reject. No, the overcoming force is 100%. From there, the host is revealed. Now there's a connection with the host from maintaining his greatness above the desire. And from the connection with him, there is equivalence of form. Equivalence of form means equivalence of intention. He wants to bestow to her, she wants to bestow to him in return, and as a result she discovers how much can she receive and how much she cannot receive. Because if she'll receive more, she'll receive it in order to receive. And this is called Masach and reflected light. When we make a calculation, this is called Rosh. So we call that part here the Rosh of the Parzuf. Right? Because here there's an action of the Creator called direct light and an action of the created being called reflected light. This Rosh, this calculation you are talking about, comes from a single condition, the condition of the Tzimtzum, restriction. If there's no restriction, there's no Rosh. There's no calculation, there's no host, there's no equivalence with the host, and certainly there's no understanding of how much can we receive and how much we cannot receive. And from that calculation comes the toch, meaning the equivalence. Let's draw it like this. Let's show it like this. The ability to receive in order to bestow. This is called the toch of the Partzuf, inner light, and how much cannot be received, and that's the sof of the Partzuf. But everything happens from this equivalence born in the Rosh of the Partzuf. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan.
Большое спасибо за прекрасный урок. Прям вот.
Thank you very much for a beautiful lesson.
И вопрос о Масахе. Хотелось бы понять его немного
A
свойства.
question about the screen.
Потому что я вижу здесь несколько. То есть я вижу П, я вижу Табор, я вижу Сиюм. Также есть ХЗ.
I see here the Pe, the Tabul, the Siyum, the Chazeh.
Свойства Масаха, это все происходит внутри Малхут.
All those qualities of the screen, does it all happen inside Malchut, or is it given from the Creator through the direct light? Misha, all the actions, operations of the screen, it's a good question. From where did the screen come? What does the screen belong to? The Creator, the vessel, the created being?
We were asked to repeat the question. Sometimes it's not that clear. So, are all the actions of the Masach and the Peh and the Tabur, the Sof, the Toch, all of that, does that happen in the Masach or in Malchut herself? Where do all these actions come from?
They are all operations of the screen. What does the screen stand? If we divide the Rosh into 5 Sfirot, we have Keter, Chochmah, Binah, Zeran, Pin, and Malchut. What is the Peh of the Rosh? What does this screen stand? In Malchut of the Rosh, that division that we learned in the previous lessons, we have in the Toch, right? In the interior of the Partzuf, we have Keter, Chochmah, Binah, Zeran, Pin, Malchut. And in Malchut, the Tabul stands, the navel, the Tabul. Here, it's the same action of Malchut. Malchut expands from her and within her, from the Peh to here. It's an act of the same, an operation of the same screen. And another part where light doesn't enter. There too, you have light of Chasadim, right? We talked about it. Because not the power not to receive, to overcome reception is also a great force. But here there's another operation of the screen. But the screen in the Peh of the Rosh has 2 qualities, right? Hardness and coarseness. The light comes from the Creator. And first of all, the created being rejects everything. All the pleasure that comes, it repels it. That's a special power. And then the second power, which is the power of coarseness, when he decides how much he can receive. And that already becomes reception. And the reflected light becomes the vessel within which the light, the direct light, is received and it enters the toch. This is why Rav calls it ta'amim, flavors, when you feel what enters. When pleasure enters the toch of the Partzuf. But the screen does all that. It's as if the Masach, the screen expands.
If I can continue, the nature of the screen itself, the Malchut asks and receives direct light, or it's a result of the Malchut? And then there's also the Chazeh. What's his role? I understand it's the upper part of Tiferet. Right, we haven't discussed the term chazeh here. We discussed so far the three terms, peh, tabur, and siyum, raglin, but like Misha just said, because the reason for all the expansion is the reflected light, screen and reflected light. That also becomes the condition for receiving the pleasure. The pleasure is not received in Malchut herself, but in the new vessel. The new vessel is called screen and reflected light. After the restriction, you can no longer receive in the desire itself, but only in the screen and reflected light. And so everything we see here, Rosh and below the Rosh, Peh, Tabur, Siyum Raglin, all of that is an outcome of the screen and the reflected light. That's why it's called expansion from her and within her. Rav once drew it like this, that let's show it like this. 1 second. If this is the will to receive, the primary will to receive that was born from the 4 phases of direct light, that will be, let's say, phase 4, then all the actions of the Partzufim with the screen and reflected light, they happen in a new vessel, above, here. And here we can find the Partzuf. This is the Rosh, Toch, and Sof. And the Malchut herself is here, meaning that all of this expansion is the expansion of the screen with the qualities of the screen, where in what he learns from the reflected light, what he receives in its action of the reflected light. This is called the first 9 sfirot, the qualities of the Creator that appear here in the Rosh. Where do they appear? In the quality of the screen. So all of the expansion of the spiritual Partzuf is not inside Malchut herself, but in the response of Malchut to the light that comes to her. Therefore, we also say that screen and reflected light become a new vessel. This is called a new vessel that didn't exist before the first restriction. Ita 4.
Buongiorno amici. Possibile spiegare la differenza tra quando nella ricezione della luce tra tagin e otiot? שלום חברים, אפשר להסביר בקבלת האור מתוך הפרצוף?
Hello friends, can you explain regarding the reception of the light in the Partzuf, what is the difference between tagin, tags, and otiyot, letters? Misha, when the light enters the vessel, can you bring back the previous diagram? Right. When the light enters the vessel, we call it ta'amim, flavors or tastes. Flavors. It's like when a person tastes. And when the light begins to exit, it is called nekudot, dots. There's a technical problem there with the writing pad.
נכון.
משהו פה מוזר. טוב, עזוב את הסיפור.
עזוב, כן. זה נקרא, כשאור יוצא מהפרצוף, זה נקרא...
Okay, so when the light exits the Partzuf, it's called nekudot, dots. Now, in nekudot, you see that the entry of the ta'amim is at once. Light enters. The exit, the refinement, is in stages. First, phase 4 exits, then 3, then 2, then 1, then root. And then the screen that was in Tabu becomes equal to the Peh. Out of this entire operation, records remain. Records from the Ta'amim are called Tagin. Right? There are letters and there are tags above them. They're called Tagin. And the records from the Nekudot are called Otiyot, letters. And Rav said, Baal HaSulam says, that they are the real vessels, the final vessels. Baal HaSulam writes in one of the introductions that there is, you have white light, that's the book, and the letters, the Otiyot, are a deficiency in the white light. They are the corrections we need to make, and each letter has its own shape, which expresses its deficiency.
Okay, before we continue, we want to watch clip number 5 from Rav, reminding us about the right intention so we don't become too smart and more remember what we're studying for. Please.
The book, the study of the 10 Sefirot, is a very special book. We see how much work Baal HaSulam invested in it, and thought, labor. In this book, there is probably very special power hidden in it to help those who study correctly and raising from world to world. It all depends on the extent to which we want, through our study, not to acquire information, intellect, knowledge, but on how much we want, through this study, to achieve an inner opening of ours, for our heart to be opened, and to be able to feel what Baal HaSulam wants to show us, to open up for us the upper world.
Yes, Kiev 3.
Yes, thank you, friends. The question is this: the exit of the light, the gradual exit in Galgalta Psak Mabon, is it a continuous action, or do all Patzufim, 5 Patzufim, exist simultaneously? Does the screen of Galgalta perform these operations with the 5 Patzufim simultaneously, or does each Patzuf has its own separate calculation?
Yes, as Misha explained before, the first Patzuf that emerges on the maximum that it can. That's why it's called 4, and it's the first and the greatest. It goes out on the maximum it can receive in order to bestow. Remember, there is a calculation in the Rosh, here, in the Rosh of the Patzuf, and as much as can be received is received after it finished receiving. Now, there are also vessels below the Tabor, which still want to receive but can't. They are forbidden to receive. And this is called bitush, the beating. Rav spoke about it in the previous lesson. And this is the gap or the tension between the will to receive that already receives in order to bestow, as if fulfilled the purpose of creation with what it could, opposite the vessels with the below that feel pressure to receive as well. And that's called surrounding light. So just like the inner light happens, there's the surrounding light that pressures to receive in the vessels that haven't received yet. And that brings out the refinement of the screen, the decision to refine the screen. And then, again, there's a calculation in the Rosh. Why did we make this line here and then the line below it? Because it discovers that this coarseness, level 4, can't be received, can't be used again because it was already used. So now it uses the next maximum level, and that's level 3. And that brings Parzuf Ab, and when it refines, then the next maximum level of coarseness that can be used is level 2, called Sag. And then that's how they emerge, one after the other. Remember how Baal HaSulam defines Kabbalah? The order of roots that hang down by way of cause and consequence in fixed, determined rules, interweaving to a single exalted goal, revelation of godliness to his creatures in this world. Meaning that this whole process is a very, very gradual, logical, based on cause and consequence, and it's very defined how each Partzuf gives birth to the next Partzuf, and there are entire chapters on this in Tess. If you remember, we just studied with Rabash a few months, and the main study there was just about how the light departs the Partzuf and how the Reshimot are created there in that expansion from above downwards. Hours on end, we heard from Rabash almost entirely just on this, Mati and not Mati, expanding and not expanding, and many, many other discernments, but it's all part of one very clear order. And now, again, like Misha explained before, we should understand that every Partzuf that is born causes all the previous Partzufim to receive light as well. So when Galgalta receives the first light called light of Nefesh, and then it is refined, now when Ab receives the light of Nefesh, it receives for the first time, it comes through Galgalta. And therefore Galgalta will now receive, as a result, the light of Ruach as well. And then when Sag is born and receives the light of Nefesh, Ab receives the second time, and now receives the light of Ruach. And Galgalta receives the light of Neshama. And thus gradually, as the lights enter the Partzufim in their order, when Bon, the last, smallest Partzuf, over the lowest coarseness level root, when it receives the light of Nefesh, that causes Galgalta to receive the light of Yechida. So it's not just the order of the birth of the Partzufim, but also the order of the entrance of the lights. So each Partzuf that receives light causes the prior Partzufim to receive more light. Avi, please.
Malchut Ein Sof,
Malchut of Ein Sof, after the restriction, when the reflected light becomes our intention, becomes Galgalta. So the question is, what does it mean that inside Galgalta, additional Partzufim are revealed, like Ab, etc.? All 5 Partzufim of the world of Ak are all inside the Guf of Galgalta. What does that mean? What changed in Malchut of Ein Sof?
Malchut of Ein Sof doesn't become Galgalta. Malchut of Ein Sof remains Malchut of Ein Sof. And it has its laws, meaning it works through circles, equality, there's no up and down. Galgalta is an addition over Malchut of Ein Sof, of the expansion of the light as a thin line into that Malchut. Malchut decided on a restriction, therefore the light departed. But now when it's received, it's not received like before, and in one go and just fills it, but it received in a very thin line, which also happens only through the order of unfolding from above downwards, so that later during our action, now when we're studying, when we're mentioning and hearing the terms and yearning to understand what we learn, it brings us very close to our soul so that we rise and climb the ladder from below upwards. And by that, we will fill the Malchut of Ein Sof that was emptied. So everything is designed for the souls. That's also why the restriction happened. So that the souls that will be detached from the light, so they have independence and they want to yearn back upwards, and that will fill the Malchut of Ein Sof. So Galgalta is just a very thin line with respect to the light that fills the Malchut of Ein Sof. Right, we have to conclude already. Yeah. Women's Pain, please.
Women's Pain.
Gracias, amigos. ¿Qué significa que el masaj se purifica y por qué esto debilita el masaj cada vez?
Thank you, friends. What does it mean that the screen is refined, and why does it weaken the screen each time? Misha, because again, we said that the vessel always received the maximum it can. And the maximum that phase 4 received in Galgalta up to the Tabu. So now the light that was not received inside the vessel continues to pressure the taboo. It's called the clash of inner light and surrounding light, meaning receive more, receive more. So the screen received the maximum it could. It can't receive anymore. So that's the mechanism that forces it to take out the pleasure it had and be equalized with the screen of the mouth. Afterwards, it'll continue to receive, but on a smaller coarseness.
Right, so we will now conclude the lesson. We will continue watching the series from Rav. It was a very condensed series, loaded with many details. And afterwards, after we finish that series, we'll start learning everything from anew, gradually, and receive all the answers to the questions that are still open. So thank you for everyone for participating. Any announcements, Sharon? Right, so we'll end with a song. Thank you very much.
מאהבה נולדנו כולם, אל האהבה נחזור. הדמעות מלוכות כמו הים, הניצות שבנו כמו אור. אלפי דרכים בעולם, רק אחת תוביל אל הדרור. בין השמחות והדמעות, איך נדע מה לבחור? איך נדע, החיים הם נדנדה. מהאמת רואים הפוך, מגבוה רואים נמוך. איך נדע, החיים הם נדנדה. מהאמת רואים הפוך, מגבוה רואים נמוך. כשאהבה רחוקה מהלב, הגעגוע גובר. מורח ילדות שנצרח, עוד מהבית הישן בחצר. בליבו של כל אדם יש ניצוץ של אהבה, כמו כינור ומיתרה. כמה יפה